So I'd like to take just a quick minute to introduce Michelle to you. Michelle is an employee of the Utah Parent Center. She's very knowledgeable and wonderful consultant. She's the mother of 7 children, including 2 adopted children with disabilities. She understands that sometimes it's hard to know how to respond when our children are involved in interactions that hurt. She's excited to share information and ideas with parents that will help them clarify their thoughts and strengthen their ability to find solutions for their family. When she has a few spare minutes, Michelle likes to play music, read something from the tower of books waiting on her nightstand, and look at pictures of her grandchildren, who really are the cutest tiny people ever.
Thank you, Stephanie. I am Michelle Krieg. I'm a parent consultant with Utah Parent Center. And I've also been a parent of children who have been bullied. I wish that I had had this information when my children were growing up, or even when I was growing up. I'm sure most of us have had personal experience with bullying or our children being bullied. So I'm really excited to share this information with you. Because we only have a short time today, this is going to be a general overview. And as Stephanie mentioned, if you have questions during the presentation, you can enter those in the chat and Stephanie will help you with that. And hopefully we'll have some time left at the end of the presentation for some additional questions. And of course, if you want to call the Utah Parent Center at any time, you can have a personal consultation regarding your specific situation and individual concerns. What we're planning to talk about today are the topics of the dynamics of bullying, what you as parents or professionals can do about bullying, action steps that you can take, and action steps that you can help your child take, and the special concerns with bullying for parents of children with disabilities. And finally, how you can help. So if we look at the dynamics of bullying behavior, we first need to ask ourselves, what is bullying? And can it be different than maybe the classic stereotype that we usually think of? Who are the bullies and who might be most vulnerable to being bullied? At first glance, many people might think it would be easy to define what's bullying behavior. The classic stereotype of bullying, of course, is a physically intimidating boy beating up on a smaller classmate. And while that is indeed bullying, today parents and professionals need to understand that bullying behaviors can extend far beyond this. They can be much more complex and they can be much more varied than the classic stereotype of physical harm. Bullying behavior can be manifested in other ways, such as verbal bullying, social bullying, emotional bullying, sexual bullying, and cyberbullying. So it's important also to note that harmful bullying behavior can also occur quietly and covertly in ways that you can't see, and they're difficult to identify through gossip, nonverbal messages, texting, on the internet, exclusion. There are a lot of ways that children can be bullied, and a lot of ways that bullying can be conveyed. But the basic guideline to remember, and that you should let your child know, that if a behavior hurts or harms them, either emotionally, physically, and if they have a hard time defending themselves, then it's bullying. The Utah.gov site does have its entire bullying policy online that you can look up, because each public and charter school is required to implement a policy to prevent and deal with bullying. So no matter how we define bullying behavior, children should know this basic rule that if the behavior hurts or it harms or it scares them, either emotionally or physically, it is bullying. So there's a difference between bullying and conflict. Typically, children experience conflict with their peers as they grow and develop, but there is a distinction between typical conflict and bullying. In normal conflict, children will self-monitor their behavior, and eventually, if they realize they're hurting someone, they will stop eventually. And children who have developed some sense of empathy then don't actually want to hurt other people. However, in children that are lacking or still developing that sense of empathy, and their behavior crosses that line, they might actually think this is cool. I'm getting a reaction here, and they'll keep pushing to get more of a reaction. So bullying isn't about resolving conflict, and it doesn't occur between two equally matched individuals. Bullying is about control. And students who bully perceive that their target is weaker in some way, and they usually find satisfaction in harming their targets. So, as a mom, when my children were younger, I would tell them, encourage them, right? You need to work this out. You need to settle this between the two of you. And what I didn't realize then is that regular conflict resolution strategies or, mediation can be misused if it's true bullying, because what you're really conveying is the message that, well, both of you are right and both of you are wrong, and you need to work it out between the two of you. And what that is really doing is giving the bully permission to continue to bully, and then the victim feeling like he's helpless and he has nowhere to turn. So those messages are not helpful or appropriate in the case of bullying, where someone really is being victimized. The appropriate message in that instance should be that bullying is wrong. No one deserves to be bullied, and we are going to do everything we can to stop it. Also, when my children were young, sometimes there was a common view that bullying was just to be expected, and it helped toughen you up, and you just needed to endure it. But now we know through research and just more personal experience that the trauma from bullying can actually be deep and enduring and far-reaching, and it can impact a lot of different areas in a child's life. So no one should have to just endure bullying. Next slide, please. The impact of bullying. So the impacts are far-reaching, as we discussed. There are three basic areas of concern to parents and professionals who are hoping to identify and then mediate bullying. The first is education. Okay, it can impact education. It can increase children's avoidance of school. They may not want to go. They may look for excuses to be absent. If it's not dealt with, they might even drop out at an early age. They can lose interest in academic achievements and hopes and dreams. Their grades can plummet. They can have a hard time concentrating. It can also impact their physical health. Those psychosomatic things that we all get when we're tense and we're anxious, stomach aches, headaches, problems sleeping, and then also emotional and psychological impacts like lowered self-esteem, lowered self-confidence, lower self-worth, fear, just generalized anxiety, depression as it continues. And perhaps the victim feels like there's nothing he can do to change this. There can also be an impact on the child's safety, which can include reactive aggression and harming others, harming themselves. Tragically, this even escalates to suicide in cases where the bullying is not addressed. So there are short and long-term negative impacts from bullying, and the damage can be far-reaching. So it needs to be addressed, not just overlooked as part of a typical childhood. So as we discussed earlier, there are varied ways that children can be bullied. So let's spend some time looking at these because some ways are harder to identify than others. Next slide. Okay, and then the next slide. So first of all, this might be the bullying that we're most familiar with, and sometimes we might not even recognize it as being bullying, and that's verbal bullying. This is the most common type of bullying because it's the easiest to inflict on other children. It's quick, it's direct. The bully will often get a very instantaneous reaction to it, a quick payoff. So it can include teasing, name calling, making threats, intimidating the child, demeaning jokes, spreading rumors, gossiping, slandering. It can even escalate to harassment based on personal characteristics, sexual orientation, gender, and disabilities. We've all heard sticks and stones can break your bones, but words will never hurt you. And of course, I'd like to know who started that saying because it's so obviously untrue. Children learn at a very early age that words do hurt. They do carry power to injure. And they learn this from a very early age. It begins usually with some pretty silly and unsophisticated name calling, right? When I think of some of the things that my daughters used to refer to my husband as an evil witch because they were into Disney at that point and some of the movies, and they picked up on the fact that the meaner people in those shows usually were witches. So it can be quite unsophisticated in young children. But as they mature, they do learn that words can harm others. And then it takes a little more development and maturity before they understand that then they should avoid using those words to harm other people. And that's a process that can take a while, which is probably one of the reasons that in general, verbal bullying tends to peak in middle school and then decrease as the children mature. They become more socially conscious and they learn to accept differences and to put themselves in the place of other people. But that process can take a while. It's interesting to know that generally, again, in general, boys like to call names and use threats, while girls will often slander and use gossip to gain social power. But, that's not always the case. And of course, bullying can extend, well past middle school and beyond. So because of the dynamics of this type of bullying, and considering the age group that it's peaking with, that they're still developing and figuring out who they are, it's sometimes difficult to distinguish the differences between, oh, it's just, all in good fun and bullying. For example, good-natured teasing might be giving someone a nickname that's maybe attached to an interest or a gift, or hopefully a positive quality or a funny incident that was shared. And if the child then who, receives that nickname or that teasing reacts by smiling, laughing, they're still on a equal power level, then that's probably okay. But if the child is hurt, frustrated, angry, if the person keeps kind of pushing that button to get the same reaction, then that is bullying. So the difference between good-natured teasing and bullying is actually the intent. The bully will have an intent to harm, to hurt, to embarrass, to get a reaction out of the other child. And then the other child, they're feeling of being hurt, excluded, embarrassed, shamed. That's obviously no longer something that's a shared positive experience. So the intention to harm the target plus a reaction of harm is bullying. Physical bullying, next slide please, is probably the easiest to recognize, of course, because it's the most visible. And we probably have all had experience with this, either ourselves or our children. It can also extend to damaging or taking a child's property, any type of unwelcome contact. I remember one of my sons got off the bus in elementary school and his jacket was just torn. The hood was torn, the sleeves were torn. And it turns out that the child sitting behind him in the bus during the course of the bus ride had just started to systematically deconstruct his jacket. And when I talked to the bus driver about that, I received kind of the attitude that, well, no harm, no foul. No bruises, no blood. He just needs to move on, not make a big deal about it. But actually, taking or damaging property is definitely in a category of bullying. Also, if a bully doesn't actually make physical contact, but just flicks or snaps or scares, trying to get someone to flinch or make a withdrawal reaction, scaring them purposefully, this is also bullying. And it can still have those long-term negative impacts. It might result in just a generalized anxiety and a desire to avoid situations where that can happen, which unfortunately can be school quite often. Next slide. So finally, oh no, not finally, social and emotional bullying. This is probably the most sophisticated type of bullying, and it's often done in groups or cliques, as we might say. It creates a general sense of not belonging, of not being good enough, not being worthy. It's very easy for a child to internalize this type of bullying if they're being ignored, if they're having rumors spread about them, if they're being excluded, made fun of. Even though it's typically not physical, it's still very damaging to the child because they tend to internalize it and then think it's their fault. It's something about them that makes them worthy of bullying. If I were thinner, if I were better looking, if I were better at this particular sport, then they wouldn't bully me. And so the child continues to feel shame for being bullied. And they need to understand that the problem is not with them. The problem is with the bully. And what they're doing is wrong. So again, emotional abuse tends to peak in middle school. It's just that time when kids are trying to figure out their pecking order in the social system. And unfortunately, they perceive that probably the easiest way to climb the social ladder is to make sure somebody else is underneath them. And so bullying can play a part in that. So even though physical aggression often receives much of the attention when we're talking about bullying, social and emotional bullying is a very significant type of bullying. Next slide, please. Sexual bullying. This might be the most difficult of all for our children to talk to us about or to report to someone else. They might be embarrassed. They might be afraid that some of the blame will fall on them too, especially, if there's been a prior relationship or a friendship. Again, our children need to understand that any type of action, communication, technology, device that is used to hurt them by sharing sexual or inappropriate content is wrong, and it's bullying. And they also need to be very clear about the boundaries in how they can expect to be treated. Children should expect to be treated respectfully. And that doesn't make them, a goody-goody or somebody who just needs to lighten up a little bit. They need to understand that relationships should be respectful, and it is not expected of them to put up with this kind of bullying in order that they fit in. Next slide, please. Cyberbullying. Cyberbullying. This was something that mercifully I didn't have to deal with too much with my older children, but it is huge now and extremely common. Cyberbullying can include any type of technology or electronic device or app that's used to send or post text or images that are intended to hurt or embarrass another person. It could include sexual harassment, like we talked about, hate speech, or just, mean-spirited ridicule. It could also be releasing a target's personal information or intimate details that they don't want widely known. It could also be encouraging others to pass on this information. There are probably more ways than we could count that cyberspace can be used to bully, and we're not always aware of that right away, but we can see the effects in our children, and we need to start the conversation with them around their social media contacts and their cyber contacts, and help them to understand that bullying is bullying, no matter where or how it occurs, and that they do not have to accept that. Next slide, please. So we've talked about some of the common views and even myths surrounding bullying, that it's a natural part of childhood, that words really don't hurt you, that some people just deserve to be bullied because of the way they act or who they are, that if you can endure bullying, it will make you tougher, that if you tell a teacher or another trusted adult about the bullying, that makes you tattling, and that it's really just another form of teasing. Next slide, please. So now that we know some of the things that are incorrect about bullying and what bullying really is defined by and the ways that it can happen, let's spend a little bit of time talking about who bullies and why. Traditionally, again, you have that stereotype of somebody who's larger, stronger, and therefore physically beats up a smaller, weaker child. But bullies can actually come in any size. They can belong to any race or religion or gender. They can even be popular. They're not always the rejected outcast themselves who, are looking to boost their self-esteem by harming someone else. They actually can be quite popular, smart, charming, have a large circle of social acquaintances. And often some of these friends that surround them are actually afraid of becoming targets themselves instead of true friends. But nevertheless, the bullies often have a large social circle around them that might intimidate the victim even more into letting someone know what's going on. However, there are there are some common characteristics that bullies share. Bullies have a powerful feeling of contempt for other people quite often, that their target is worthless or inferior to them, that they just don't deserve respect or, common decency. Bullies can often have a sense of entitlement, that they deserve to treat others this way because they're special somehow. They can thrive on a sense of control and dominance. This is a very common characteristic shared by bullies, is that it is a way to gain control and a sense of power by dominating another person. They are often intolerant of differences in other people. And often they themselves have a hard time distinguishing between fear and respect. So they think if, somebody fears them, that actually means they're being respected. And they have a hard time making that distinction, that other people can fear them and yet not respect them. So a typical common denominator among children who bully is that they just lack empathy for the people that they target. Next slide, please. On the other hand, are there some common characteristics of people who are often targeted by bullying? While there's no typical profile of someone who might be subjected to bullying, there are some common characteristics as well among the children who tend to be targets of this behavior. Those might include children who struggle with the ability to defend themselves. So they're an easy mark. They might react very emotionally to the bullying. They might show a lot of anger, a lot of fear, frustration, crying. So that's a big payoff for somebody who is looking for signs that they have gained dominance or control over someone. They might have few close friends or peers. They might be socially isolated. They might not be noticed by other people. They might just kind of fly under the radar, so to speak. Quite often they have underdeveloped social skills. They might have trouble reading social and emotional cues in other people, nonverbal cues. They might have difficulty communicating how they feel. And so, of course, as we're considering these characteristics, we're understanding that children with disabilities quite often share a number of these characteristics because of their disability. So that does make them more prone to be targeted, sadly. Although bullying seems to be kind of an equal opportunity activity, and anybody can be bullied. Next slide, please. So can someone be the targeting of, So in that case, because bullying isn't always immediately visible, and it really can be anybody that's being bullied or being the bully, we need to look for warning signs and be alert for those. And some of those signs in our children can be depression. It can be increased aggression toward other people, right? Maybe younger, weaker siblings or acquaintances that they in turn can attempt to regain some sense of control over by bullying other people. Their grades, as we mentioned, might decrease suddenly. They might lose interest in social activities or doing things in other environments where they might not feel safe. They might even lose weight from the stress and the worry, or they might gain weight because they are eating more to comfort themselves, to release those endorphins. They might begin to say that they're sick all the time, even though there aren't any visible symptoms. They might try to do things to drastically change their appearance, thinking again that if they just looked different, then they wouldn't be bullied. And again, they might themselves respond to other people that they perceive are bullying them in ways that are reactive and aggressive themselves, when perhaps that's not typical of them. Reactive bullying can mean that they're acting more impulsively, they're reacting more quickly to other people's behavior. They will use more physical responses. They might begin to taunt others around them. So these are warning signs that might signal a child is being bullied, even if they don't recognize it themselves. Next slide, please. So because, as we mentioned, children with disabilities quite often have some of those characteristics that make them vulnerable to becoming targets of bullying. The reality is that children with disabilities are significantly more likely to be bullied than their non-disabled peers. Some of the statistics that we know from research are that 60% of students with special needs have reported being bullied. So those are just the ones that report, right? Compared to about 25% of the general population. Children with special needs or a disability are 10 times more likely to be bullied than the typical student. And that's truly alarming, because current statistics from the federal government show already that 15 to 25% of school-age children, typical school-age children, are bullied with some frequency. So 10 times that is hugely significant. 40% of children with autism and 60% of children with Asperger's syndrome have experienced bullying. And of course, that's heartbreaking, because our children already have obstacles and challenges that they're working to overcome, and bullying just adds to those. Next slide, please. So then we ask ourselves, what can we do as parents and professionals? There are some steps that we can take. And as I reference some of the resources in the next few minutes, please know that you can find all of these resources on the Utah Parent Center website. And Stephanie should be including a link to that website in the chat line. If you get on to utahparentcenter.org and under the resources tab, drop down to bullying, you will find many, many resources for parents and professionals and children to help address bullying. So, next slide, please. First thing that we can do is to know the laws. Most states do have laws that address bullying in school, but they vary from state to state. There is, however, on the website stopbullying.gov, a detailed map that is interactive and contains information state by state on that state's bullying policy. There are also federal laws that apply in every state to protect students with disabilities from harassment and from bullying. And these laws apply when the bullying or the harassment interferes with a student's right to a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. So it's easy to understand how a child who's being bullied doesn't want to attend school, is unable to concentrate, has a high level of anxiety, doesn't want to participate in the activities at school. It's very easy to see how that actually is interfering with that child's access to a free, appropriate public education. And in that case, the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act would apply. There as a civil right that's being violated. Also, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act also addresses this for students with IEPs, that if the bullying escalates to a point where it is impacting their education, then they are possibly being denied FAPE. Next
Michelle,
slide, please. Oh, yes, Stephanie.
just wanted to say it's 10:40, and so we have about 10 minutes left of the presentation, and then about 2 minutes to wrap things up.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. You went to the next slide. You're awesome. Thank you. So therefore, we need to help our children deal with bullying and not feel like they're all alone with this burden. And again, on the UPC website, there's an excellent resource entitled Steps to Take If Your Child is Being Bullied. Kind of a startling statistic is only about 20 to 30% of students who are bullied actually notify adults about that bullying. So you may have to start the conversation if you see some of those warning signs, because it's possible that the child herself doesn't even recognize that she is being treated inappropriately, that she is actually being bullied, especially if they have convinced themselves that it's something about them that is causing the bullying. So that Steps to Take If Your Child is Being Bullied resource on our website is a good one. But if a child does start the conversation about bullying, it's important for you to listen, to believe, and to support them, and let them know that you're really glad they came to you and that you're going to help them with this. They're not alone in this. It might also help to share an experience that you've had with bullying. I know I had some as a child, and they left an indelible impact on me. And I can still share that with my children to show them that I understand that this is not okay, and I'm going to help them address that. Next slide, please. So we also need to prepare ourselves as parents, because it's very easy to be triggered ourselves when someone is threatening or hurting our child. You know, the mama bear, the papa bear comes out in us. We might feel guilt that we didn't know this sooner, that we couldn't prevent it. We might feel a little helpless ourselves and victimized because we might not know what to do. We might get angry. I actually think the angriest I've ever been in my life has been when I have perceived that one of my children was being bullied or harmed in some way. So those are natural and normal emotions for adults to have when the children that they care for are being bullied. But we need to control our emotions and focus on the issue and addressing the issue, because if we get over emotional, then we're going to be less effective in helping our children. Next slide, please. So there are some reactions to avoid. Again, this probably falls under the common views and myths category, that if you just ignore him or her, it will stop, it'll go away. And we know that's not true. In fact, bullies will quite often escalate the behavior if they don't get a reaction in order to finally get one. And telling them to take matters into their own hands or stick up for themselves, again, that quite often escalates the situation. And if bullies perceive that their victim is all alone, that can embolden them. So addressing the problem together and with other responsible adults is the best way to approach this. Next slide. quick action from adults, consistent action from adults, nurturing a safe environment. Again, adults are responsible for that. And also putting in place a prevention strategy. There's a resource on our website called Steps to Take if your child is being bullied at school that discusses this, and also more resources at stopbullying.gov. So if your child isn't currently being bullied, there's a good chance that they have been or that they will witness bullying themselves. And if that's the case, then you need to have discussions with your child about the difference between being a bystander and an upstander, and how important it is to intervene in ways that you can to stop bullying whenever they see it, so that the victim doesn't feel alone, doesn't continue to be bullied, and that the bully doesn't continue the behavior thinking that no one notices or cares. We need to encourage self-advocacy in our children, and that means reporting the situation to a parent or a guardian or a trusted adult at school, asking the bully to stop, just letting them know, could you please stop? Please don't do that again. Move away from the situation, and then create a plan for the future. When my children were smaller, I used to tell them, stop, walk, talk. That was easy for them to remember. They could request that the person stop because they might not be intentionally bullying, especially in younger children who are still developing that sense of boundaries and empathy. Stop, walk, just leave if you can, just leave, and then talk to someone about it so that they are aware of the situation. Older children can be encouraged to actually put together an action plan, and at Bullying 411 at pacer.org, and we'll put this in the chat stream, there's actually a brochure that shows a student action plan to address bullying that can be very helpful. So when you are reporting bullying, you want to document the incident. This is really important. Every incident of bullying needs to be written down and communicated to the people in charge. You need to have the date and the time of the incident, the date and time that you're communicating this, a summary of the event, keep track of the responses of professionals to your communication, and any reports that the school files in accordance with district policy. You can include photos of the impact of the bullying if you wish, and maybe doctor's reports if they were involved as well. So create complete documentation around the incident so that the people that you work with understand the seriousness of the issue. If it's not in writing, it's quite often considered not to exist. So it's really important to document that. Then you want to work with the school. It's important to notify the teacher, the school administrator, everyone working with your child, and communicate that in writing. Let them know, again, what you've documented, what's going on. On the website, there's a reporting bullying template that will help you communicate this information to the school. There's also a resource that talks about IEPs and bullying, how you can actually address bullying as part of an IEP. So that's under our bullying resources. It might happen at some point that your child is actually the bully in a given situation. And it might be in response to being bullied themselves, but they still need to understand that any action that hurts or harms another individual is bullying and is inappropriate. So we need to teach them that, because again, they may not recognize that their behavior, especially if it's a reaction, can be defined as bullying, also can be considered as bullying, can hurt someone and can get them into trouble. So help your child understand what bullying is, and the alternate ways that they need to deal with that rather than reacting aggressively themselves. So in conclusion, let's remember that bullying is a behavior. It's not a characteristic, so it can be addressed and changed. Bullies themselves need to be dealt with using compassion and concern and taught what they should do instead of bullying. We need to talk with our child and maybe consider if part of the reason they are bullying is related to their disability, and then try to teach them, again, alternate ways of handling those situations that use empathy and respect. Provide clear, consistent expectations and consequences for bullying. Role play is an excellent way. Video modeling is an excellent way to help your child learn more appropriate ways to respond to either bullying or frustration, those kinds of things. And then, understand that this is a developmental process and it's going to take some time. But the impact of bullying, both on the bully and the victim, is again deep, long lasting in its impact. And it does need to be addressed instead of overlooked and ignored, because then it will only get worse. So I hope that you heard something today that was helpful to you. Again, we have so many resources on our website. If you just go to utahparentcenter.org and you use the resources tab, drop down to bullying, there are so many helps on there for you in learning to identify bullying, talk about bullying, report bullying, and then, help the behavior change. So thank you for being with us. I'm sorry we've had so many technical difficulties, but I'm glad I had some helpers here, or we probably would have been staring at the same screen the entire time.
But want to thank Michelle sincerely for a wonderful session. It was so informative. We're so grateful for that incredible content. We couldn't have done this without you.